Hey guys, welcome to the Spiritable podcast. My name is Luke.
And my name is Richard. I'm currently getting my master's in theology.
And I have absolutely no marketable skills whatsoever.
And we're going to be talking about spirituality and everyday life struggles from our non-traditional Christian background.
Obviously, we don't have all the answers, so we're going to be dragging on some guests to diversify and talk about their opinions and perspectives.
Yeah, and we think it's weird that people aren't more open talking about spiritual ideas and stuff like this in everyday conversation. So we're talking about it here.
Boom.
Small disclaimer, we're having a discussion about gender that comes from our perspectives. Just because we don't include all perspectives doesn't mean we don't love them all. We can only think from what we know.
Yeah, like these are incredibly muddy waters we're getting into, so we can only speak from our experience. And it's not to say that we know everything, because definitely that's not the case. Yeah.
This is the beginning of a very long, very deep discussion. And it's just a simplistic start.
Yeah. So again, if you have any thoughts or you're offended by anything or want to know more, leave a comment. We'd love to continue this conversation. Hey guys, thank you for watching and welcome back to the Spiritable podcast, where today we have our special guest, Melissa Boyer. Hi Melissa, how are you?
Hi, good.
So I like to intro our guests by asking them to give a little dating bio about themselves. And you are a married woman, so obviously not as applicable anymore, but if you were to create a dating profile for yourself, what would that be?
Oh, I see.
What would you say about
you
yourself?
want to hear about my dating history?
First question. Tell us about your dating history.
Tell us about every
Oh,
ex.
jeez.
Oh, that's a topic for another day. Exes. Write that down.
Okay. Married white female, 32, 5'3", likes moderately length walks on the beach.
Not too much. If you're comfortable with it, we like to get a spiritual taste for people's lives and see what your spiritual background's like, your history of belief, sort of, if you don't mind indulging us.
My history of belief.
Yeah.
I grew up in the General Church of the New Jerusalem. I never say it
It's a long
all the way. The New Church. But my relationship with God has always been pretty good. I've always wanted to believe in God and chosen to believe in God. And when things have gotten hard, I don't lose my faith so much as get angry at God. That's kind of been more the way I deal.
That's interesting.
I think my biggest struggle with religion thus far was trying to figure out how to have a relationship with God or Jesus or whatever as a woman, because everything in religion is so inherently patriarchal and masculine, and that felt really lonely to me. So that's sort of an ongoing thing, but I'm sort of too tired to really think about it a lot right now.
We were just having, sorry to interrupt you, we were just having a conversation about just this in one of my classes, which was really interesting. Talking about
I'd love to have been there.
We have, for sort of the role of God, Jesus Christ as sort of God made man, and I've always found it very easy to connect with that as, oh, I'm made in the image of God, I'm a guy, he's a guy, there we go. And how, because Jesus Christ was a man, the difficulty with how women connect and ways we can go about helping that. Is it to stress a divine feminine? Is it to sort of stress it more as a father figure of both sons and daughters, sort of these different ways that we can different kinds of relationships we can have. And at the end of the day, it's just like I have no idea what that's like.
Being a girl.
As a guy,
That too.
I have no idea what it's like to try to connect with a God that is not expressed linguistically as my gender.
Yeah. I think for me, while I like reading things Jesus said, like the Sermon on the Mount and all of that, I more or less cast Jesus to the side. Not aside, that feels too dramatic, but just that's not how I picture God.
You mean as like a physical person?
Yeah,
/
because
man?
I mean, especially after 3 pregnancies that were very difficult and everything with that, just the idea of a man being my only spiritual savior just really felt so inadequate. Because, I mean, I've had a pretty easy life. Like, my biggest challenge is just, like, being a woman. You know, other people have real problems, and I'm just like, oh, you know,
Everyone
my
has
period,
problems, though. It doesn't
so
mean they're
hard.
less.
Oh, I'm pregnant. I hate it. You know, I know it's not that big of a deal to a lot of people, but for me, it's been hard, and I've just found myself wondering, why do I have to go through so much pain just because of my gender? Like, this is just weird. And then why does society tell me that I'm less than all the time when I'm like, I don't know.
Is it?
How do I say this?
Is it just society, or do you feel less than in religion too because of that kind of patriarchal historical
Well, yeah.
past?
I mean, think how many stories are there in the Bible about women?
I think I've had a kind of a blank spot in my empathy for connecting to a God or God in that kind of way because, like Richard, I identify as a man, and so reading the Bible and the writings of Swedenborg as a man, I identify with it like that. And I didn't really, admitting my own ignorance and fault here, I just didn't even really think about it from the opposite side.
Yeah.
And how hard that would be for me as a man to connect to if everything was gendered more toward the feminine. And it's just different.
Maybe men need that more than women. I mean, maybe if it's all according to a divine plan, maybe the idea was that women have an easier time connecting to abstract concepts. But I don't know, because all of us are so different. But I would say that I think one of the things that's been the most empowering for me from Swedenborg is how often he talks about the fact that there are many, many paths to the divine and many ways to be a religious person, and that all over the world there are different versions of essentially the same story, which is that, there is a God, believe in God, and be a good person. It's pretty much all that is. And so there are a lot of different ways to practice spirituality and still, get to heaven, I think. And I'm a yoga teacher, and my study of yoga actually has been really helpful because yoga is essentially a way to connect with the divine through a physical practice and meditation. It's not really designed to be its own religion, but it's more like a guidebook for you take your faith and then you insert it into yoga. And there's yoga is kind of the lifestyle practice of faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, for example, there are rules ultimately like do no harm. Like it depends on how far you take it, right? Do no harm. So it could just be like, hey, I wanted to, give that guy the finger because he cut me off, but I didn't. I didn't harm him, But then long term, the more your practice grows, you may feel like, oh, eating meat, that's doing harm. And then.
So are you a vegetarian?
No, I think I should be.
I was just talking to one of my professors, and he was like, I rarely get more nervous than when I'm having conversations with vegetarians. And it's not because I'm sick and tired of hearing that I should be a vegetarian. It's that I'm too scared that they're right. And so I just want to avoid it.
Oh, no, that doesn't feel good.
I was like,
But I don't think you should do it. It shouldn't be about everyone else being wrong. It should just be about... I feel like
More
once you get
personal
to a point in life where you realize the truth, something that's true for you, then you can't be in integrity until you're living that truth, right? So if you don't think eating meat is wrong, then you're good. But if I think eating meat is wrong and I keep eating meat, then I'm living as a hypocrite, right?
But not everything.
I'm also breastfeeding, so it's okay. It's okay.
What does that mean?
It just makes you very hungry.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It takes a lot out of you.
Feeding more than one, so
Yeah,
gotta
exactly.
do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
Okay, so feel free to not answer this question, or we can just skip it. Okay. But I hear about a lot of people who are pregnant and having contrasting sort of emotions and feelings about it as a woman. Like some people feel really empowered as a woman and like powerful and beautiful
very
because
lucky.
of it, and other people are just like, this is the worst thing that's happened. So
Yeah, no, I hate it. I hated it. I really did. Well, let me come back to
You've
that,
done
though,
it
because
3
I
times,
just wanted to finish my thought about
please.
yoga, which is that in yoga, you're connecting with a divine entity that's not really ever described. And one of the things you do through your practice and through your meditation is the idea of connecting to the oneness of everything, which I actually think coincides well with Swedenborg, because the idea is that divine well, divinity flows through all of us, right? Not that we are divine, but that if you think, for example, breathing, which is a big thing in yoga and also the thing that keeps us alive, breathing it's as if like the divine life is supporting you. Like you don't think about breathing, it's just happening. Without respiration, you would die. It's very important. It's crucial. So to me, that idea of like connecting to your breath, connecting to a divinity that's abstract, it's like it's in everything. Like I think of it as the way the sun nurtures the earth and plants grow. I kind of think of God more on that level as like, not like God is the sun, but sort of.
And there's a lot
It's
of
a
that in the
representation
writings.
of the Lord, and it's about keeping the earth alive and people alive, and this quiet nurturing force that makes all life possible. But like the sun, rarely interferes, right? And that's how freedom exists. But so for me, thinking of God as oneness and as the sun, it sort of allows for me to have some room to imagine the divine femininity and the divine masculinity working as one together to make life possible.
Yeah,
So that's where that is.
I totally agree with that. I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. And there's a lot of cool stuff in what Swedenborg has written about the sort of nature of the two genders in God. And somebody a while ago wrote a paper and coined the term a genderful God instead of
Genderful, like
instead of like
thoughtful, like gender. Just
genderful instead of like genderless, like an agendered God,
Not outside
or
of
a
gender,
purely
but-
masculine God, a genderful God. Because where did genders come from? Where did
Right.
everything come from? And sort of the whole creation of the world is basically, like you were saying, the divine coming down
Right.
and becoming more and more accommodated or adjusted to the level that it's coming down into. So the heaven is closer to God than we are. I mean, just makes sense. And yeah, so that idea of God coming down into both the masculine and the feminine equally, and that it's not like, oh, it comes into this one more than that one, because
Yeah.
or like,
that-
oh, their creation's outside of the nature of God. Like God doesn't have gender, and all these. And
Well, that's
there's
not fair either.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Because then it's like, how can God connect with what I go through as a man or what you go through as a woman if he has no gender? Like, how could we possibly connect with him on that level?
Genderful. I kind of like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I
Which is
also
just
I never
think
heard that
idea.
before.
making, separating genders and then separating sex and sexuality from the genders and making it all bad and all separate has been so damaging. Why are we so busy separating men and women and separating masculine and feminine and trying to see them as different things when really the whole point is for them to work together? Mm-hmm. That's what perfection is. It's a divine union of both.
And I think kind of the humankind's history is leading toward this path where we're not looking at all these differences, but appreciating what they are for each other and all kind of coming together. Like even in the last 50 years, we've, stereotypical gender roles have evolved a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious to see how that trend is going to continue and, if things are going to go so far as to say men and women are exactly the same or
I would say that's damaging too.
Right, because it goes too far that direction. So,
Right.
I mean, I don't want to offend.
Why would we all want to be the same? What's
Yeah.
what's the use?
Yeah, that'd be boring if everything
Right.
was the same. I get caught up with that, like in my relationship sometimes is I project myself a lot into my relationship, and I'm like, I want this in my relationship because this is how I am, and it's the right way to live.
We all
Very
do that.
selfish. But if my partner was exactly who I am, that would be no fun and not very good for my regeneration.
Yeah, it'd be really boring.
Yeah. So, what are the lines of masculine and femininity? Like, what are the differences that are going to hold throughout the test of time? Are there any? Or are we just going to become a blob of mixed sexuality?
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And the other day I was, again, talking about this with some of my classmates, and I was like, I feel confident saying that there are distinctions innate in people between masculine and feminine And then when people ask me what they are, I'm like, yeah, well, see ya. Bye.
Yeah.
Why? Why
Because
run away there?
I think once it gets from like the inbuilt structure of the mind, going through all of the processes of thinking and past experience and, thoughts about yourself and social thoughts about who you should be and how to interact socially and all these barriers of communication that it has to flow through to be expressed in words or in actions, it can show up so differently. And so to say like, aha, that's like a feminine thing to do.
I'm going to put you in a box.
That's a masculine thing to do. There's been so much filtering at that point. For me to point at anything and say, oh, well, you do that because you're feminine or because you're masculine, is for me to reverse engineer something that has so many complicated parts. I could not possibly understand the process that brought it to be what it is. And that's, I think, what we always run into with people being like, oh, that's a feminine thing. And you're like, well, I'm a guy, I do that thing. And you're like, well, yeah, but mostly feminine, though.
But you can be a guy and do a feminine thing. It doesn't make you female, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I think we get too caught up in what it all means. Like, yeah, I mean, but I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. My 5-year-old is daughter, and my son is the 2-year-old. Like I was saying with Henry wearing tutus, like he just wanted to wear a tutu.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's not expressing that he like wishes he was a girl.
Yeah, that doesn't have to mean.
He just wants to wear a tutu, and so he bangs with a hammer. That's not because like he's a man and only men. I mean, my daughter does the same thing. He might do one a little more than the other, and she might do one a little more than the other, but they're both capable of a wide variety of things. Right. It's funny, the older she gets, actually, the more she's interested in what boys do and what girls do. And I really feel like that for her is coming from like, I don't know where it's coming from, because I don't feel like I have modeled that. I mean, I'm primarily a stay-at-home mom, so I guess in that sense we have a very traditional domestic arrangement. But my husband's home a lot, and he does a lot of work from home, and I tend to do more art and crafty things, and I do bake a lot, and he does a lot of like woodworking. But
it's also hard.
It's not like only men do this. Like if I want to build something and he's taking too long, I just do it. And if he is also a great baker and a great cook, and he's not super into crafts, but I'm not really either. It's just something to do with kids, So we break down on different roles, but my point is we have not, made any explicit definitions of what your role is based on your gender in our household.
To your kids.
In fact, probably once my husband's done with his current job, I will be the breadwinner and he will be the stay-at-home mom. And he'd be proud to take that role. He great. Cannot, so in terms of explicitly feminine or explicitly masculine, he cannot get pregnant. He cannot carry a baby, and he cannot breastfeed.
Yeah, in terms of biological sex.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there are, man things that I cannot do and do not have. And I really think that's kind of it for, there's no question that he can lift things that I can't. He's much stronger than me in certain ways. But I think a woman's strength is sort of living through being a woman. You know what I mean? And in the sense that a lot of experiences for women, a lot of our pain and struggle can come from our own body and the cyclical nature of womanhood. And that's not true for everyone, but I do think there's some amount of suffering and strife that goes along with that, and we withstand it because we have to and we're capable, right? But giving birth, you guys don't have kids, but it would be interesting to interview a man, who has kids about what the experience of watching his wife give birth was like. Yeah. Because for me it was hard, but I had a job to do. And for him, I think it must have been just so weird, just like, what is it, like crossing his fingers? And I remember at one point when I was in labor with Violet, he started saying like, just breathe. And I was like, I know. What do you think I'm doing? How could I not breathe? And I don't think I was that mean. I think I said, I might have been, I don't know. I think I said, I think that's helping you more than it's helping me. Please stop telling me to breathe. And he's like, sorry, I just needed to do something. And I'm like, okay, you can rub my back, but like, stop talking. Because your body kind of takes over and you go through it. But I think as a man watching that, it must be really scary. You know, you just have to like let your wife go through it. And no matter how you give birth, whether it's a C-section or whether you're taking the drugs or not, it's going to be hard. And there's going to be a hard recovery associated with that. There's no equivalent. There's no equivalent for men. It's actually so mind-blowing to me how dramatically different our physical experiences of the world are. That women can undergo something that dramatic and intense. And, you know, it's going to take me at least a year before my body even starts to feel like my body. So there's just this long period of just feeling kind of weird, maybe being a little heavy and, you know, the idea of like losing the pregnancy weight, that's a cultural thing. That's optional. That doesn't have to matter, you know, but it does a little because we are in this culture. And sometimes it takes a while and sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you're just going to like kind of feel and be weird and you have a lot of healing to do, even if it went really well. And I know after like the first couple weeks, I'm a very dramatic example. I think a lot of women are like much more stoic and reserved and polite than I am. But I spend, at least there's like a couple weeks, you know, after the baby's born where I just like hate him because he's a man. And
Your
because
husband?
I'm like, yeah. And I remember him saying something to me about like, oh, maybe I should work out more. And I'm like, you're just so lucky that all you have to do is work out and it's different. Like me, I had this thing happen that's going to take me a year to just be normal again. But you, like if you gain weight or you lose weight, unless you have an illness or something, which, you know, we'll all experience that at some point, generally it's like his choice, right? Whereas for me, like when you have a baby, like you really have to gain weight. I guess you're consenting to pregnancy and therefore you're consenting. But honestly, like how much of what happens to your body is really optional. You never know what kind of pregnancy you're going to have until you're pregnant. And even each kid can be different.
Such a huge thing.
Yeah, literally. You feel like a huge thing.
My friend told me a statistic that messed with my version of reality, which was that on average, the human body contains more than one skeleton because of pregnancy.
Oh.
So the average is always more than one skeleton in a human body, which is just weird. Getting back to like the men and women and differences, that's a very like physical example of like this is a very clear difference between a man and a woman. And I think where we get into the danger zone is when we go up in your mind instead of in your body and be like, you think this way because you're a man. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier, and I was thinking about it like maybe it comes down to we get in trouble when we don't know a person and we think we understand them because of their gender from an outside perspective. We don't know them as a person. So like if I see someone walking in and label them as something because of my perceived version of their gender, I get into dangers there. But you can appreciate the masculinity and femininity of someone once you get to know them. Like in my relationship with Brandy, I see these feminine things in her that I really appreciate. And I know I have sort of more feminine thoughts in my mind that she appreciates. And I can appreciate some more like stereotypical masculine thought patterns from her that kind of mesh with these sort of feminine thought patterns that I have. So I don't know. Maybe you have to be close to it in order to be able to express it and see the femininity and masculinity in someone. And we get in trouble when we do it from afar. If any of that makes sense. I'm trying to wrap my mind around these differences between masculine and femininity in our minds and our spirits. Because it's easy to tell like body stuff, you know? I don't know.
I wonder if more of that is like culturally masculine or culturally feminine things that appear in each other, or whether it's like we all have innately feminine pieces of us or innately masculine pieces of us. And I tend to lean more on the side of those being sort of cultural expressions. Like for me as an example, I think sort of two ways that people can go, and these aren't the only two ways, when they get emotional about something is they can go to anger or they can go to sadness. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, men get mad and girls get sad. And, you know, men hit something and girls cry. And I was an angry kid, yeah. but as an adult, I will go to cry every time. Like, and I sort of for a while got kind of puffed up about it and was like, oh, I'm a champion against toxic masculinity.
Because I can cry.
Because I'm a man that's okay with showing emotion.
Yeah.
And I'm taking a counseling course right now, and a lot of it is like reflective practices that sort of help us understand emotions so we can understand it in other people when we're pastors. And I realize that so much of the reason why I go to sadness is because I didn't really see a place for my anger in my household growing up. So I was angry like with my friends growing up, but then always sort of smiley with my family and then sad by myself. And so I received this message that like sadness is more okay in the family than anger is. And so I think it was just a case of like my family influence was stronger than the cultural influence, and thus I am this way. Which sort of is like, oh, okay, well, I'm still just like a result of influence from my childhood.
Yeah.
So in no way
Maybe.
am I like, I chose this to smash how people think men should be. It's just like, well, when I was a kid, I didn't feel like I could be mad. And so I am sad in the same way that everyone, in a way, has their emotional state as a reaction to outside pressures. So yeah, it's just weird. That,
Yeah,
like,
I think it's really tricky to assign emotions a masculine or feminine value. To me, what masculinity ultimately is more of a sense of protectiveness and everything that comes along with that. And for the essence of femininity to me is nurturing, right? It's sort of like the earth mother and the, I don't know what you guys hunt or something. And I feel like that's kind of what it is at its essence. And then assigning anything else to that is really tricky, because I do think that there are biological differences and instincts in men and women that are valuable and shouldn't be denied just because we're all trying to be the same or prove some point, you know?
Well, I
We'll
think
have
it's
different things to
easy
say.
for broad society to slap labels on things because it's just easy to generalize. So it's easy to say all men like cars, or all men want to punch things, or various implications of norms, quote unquote. And I think we are all a mixed bag of that, and that's just cultural things. Like, I really like flowers. Like, I think I enjoy giving Brandy flowers more than she enjoys getting them. Like, I just don't think she cares that much, but I really enjoy the aesthetic of flowers. I think they're great. And that's a very cultural feminine thing, just because of history. And I don't think that has any inherent meaning to it necessarily. So yeah, and I think we're getting to a cool point where we're pushing back against these cultural masculine and feminine things that don't have a lot of use like that. Like, there's not a lot of use in being like, women like flowers. Not real use in that. So I wonder if we're going to get to a place where we're actually seeing a useful difference between men and women. And so I think we've covered a lot of okay, yes, there are physical differences between men and women. Mentally, it gets a little bit more tricky, and there are a lot of societal and cultural implications to how men and women, quote unquote, think, or the biases we want to give to that. Yeah. So moving on next, spiritually, like, we believe in the new church that there are men and women in heaven. So what is the spiritual difference between a man and a woman, if in the afterlife there are men and women? And that, I'm going to shut up now.
That's interesting.
a lot of what that gets down to spiritually,
Theologue.
So sort of the two essences, or the two things that make up everything, the two natures of God that are obviously just conjoined in him, is this idea of love and wisdom, sort of this duality of like emotional side, will side, what you want, motivation, which often result in feelings, passion, and then an intellectual side. And I think this is something that comes out culturally in a lot of sideways ways. Like, oh, like women are emotional and men are intelligent. And like that's such a huge and damaging undersimplification of it. I think it's that women come from a place of motivation to
like the spiritual woman.
Yeah, like the spiritual woman comes from a place of motivation, from a place of her will, philosophically, to her mental processes, and a man comes from a place of his intelligence to his heart. I think men often access their heart through their mind, through like, trying to understand how they're feeling. They get to how they feel. Mm-hmm. And I think women, and of course this can come out as a woman from her will, from her motivation, wants X, Y, or Z, and has a brilliant mind that she accomplishes that with. One of the smartest minds in the world, or whatever. You know, it's not that either has a deficiency in the other. It's that how they move toward it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes out in one of the, and again, this is a broad statement that I don't think I want to apply to anyone or is accurate to, but I think one thing I've noticed is that I think women in general have a more connective mind and men have a more organizational mind.
Compartmental.
Yeah, like men compartmentalize a lot more easily than women in general, I've seen. And I think there's huge benefits of both. And I think oftentimes with my relationship with my fiance, you know, something will happen and we'll be in the middle of something and I'll be like, okay, well, I'll deal with that later. I'm going to get this done. And she's like, no, like that changes everything that's happening. What are you talking about? But there are also times where I'm like, okay, so this is here and that's here. And she's like, what? Like, don't you see how those are connected and how it's so important that those are connected and how you saying something over here affects that person because of what was happening to them over there? Like, how could you be so thoughtless? I'm like, oh, I just figured, you know, here's a box and here's a box. And what do you mean? And so there's so much that I have seen go into that.
But what sucks with that is we can say these things spiritually, but it's so hard to look at them as just that spiritual differences, things being equated. Because even while I'm hearing this, I'm having all these cultural and societal things come in to say, okay, but we need to defend that women are on equal planes with men in this sort of way, because historically women have just been seen as less in everything, including these spiritual things. So it stinks that they're not automatically seen as on the same plane. And
yeah, well,
it's so frustrating.
Think about how recent women's freedom really is. I mean, when you think even in terms of, I guess we'll call them sanitary napkins, just the freedom to not sit in the red tent for a week when you're menstruating. You can wear something and go out and be a normal person. But, I mean, there's been a lot of time in history where that wasn't really an option. You can't really go anywhere. I mean, it's kind of a drag, right? Or being pregnant, how intense that can be, or time recovering from that, nursing a baby. I mean, women's lives are so physically tethered to themselves,
External
I guess.
Things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It makes sense, I think, on that level that women have been held back, because I think for many, many years we've just been too tired to really argue, and, you know, and also haven't been educated that often. How often have women had access to education, been able to make an intellectual argument that rivals a man's? Men have been able to do that for so much longer.
And it's created a system where the intellect is more important than
what is deemed as physical strength. Like I said, I would argue that men and women are equally strong, but with different abilities.
Yeah.
And I think,
like, ain't no way I can push a baby up.
yeah.
No.
Physical strength I do not possess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's just no equivalent. I mean, really think about that.
Yeah. Well,
That's crazy.
and we haven't been at a place in history
How
where
completely
that
unequal.
Yeah.
What if you have multiple children? I mean, if you have if I have, let's say per child, I feel like this is a very cynical view, but in a way I'm sort of losing 2 years of my life. There's the year of pregnancy where I'm less and less able to care for myself and be totally physically independent. There's the recovery postpartum, which doctors recommend at least 6 weeks before you even take up any regular exercise, and even then take it easy. C-section, it's at least 8 weeks. I mean, that's a couple months after the baby's born. And then you're nursing. If you're nursing, that's could be every few hours for months.
And the physical toll it takes on your body for your lifetime afterward.
Right. It's a lot.
It's a huge commitment.
It's a lot of work. I'm listening to you guys talk about the differences spiritually between men and women, and all I'm thinking is, gosh, it sounds so easy to be a man. It sounds so nice. You can just separate everything and just go do what you have to do. And I feel like the amount of mothers I know who have taken a weekend away from their kids, it's like 2. And I know a lot of people, okay? So it's pretty crazy. It's like very hard to separate yourself from your family and from your duties. You're just thinking about them all the time. I mean, even coming here for me was like, I'm leaving my husband, and I'm like, okay, she needs this and this and this, and you're gonna have to do this. And he's like, I'll be okay. Actually, I got here and he called me and he's like, yeah, our 2-year-old pooped on the carpet. And I was like, okay, this makes it easier for me to separate. I'm so glad I'm not there. Good luck.
Have fun, bye.
But it's just constant neediness, and I envy my husband going to work sometimes because he can just be there and do that. And for me, it's like unending. Like even nursing overnight, like I am never away from my kids. And not every woman has kids, and not every woman will, and that I guess isn't what makes a woman, but it's just a way to, I guess, illustrate that connection that you're talking about. That feeling of it's always there. I mean, I'm always like at any given moment, I'm thinking like my kids, the things I have to do, the dinner I have to make, what happened to me one time in high school that I still feel weird about, or like the job I wish I had or might do someday. Like there's just a million things going on at once. Right. That's why I meditate.
To clear it out.
Yeah, and this idea of like women being jealous of the way that men's minds work is something that I've run into before, with girls being like, oh, I just wish I was a guy so I didn't have to deal with like thinking this way that really frustrates me, or like having my thoughts controlled by my hormones in this and that way. And I was always sort of baffled by it. Like, I have never felt that way. I have never been like, gee golly, wish I was a woman.
Oh, nobody wants to be a woman.
And
it's so hard.
Recently, in my relationship with Sonia, because I'm thinking more and more about how I'm going to be as like a counselor to people, as I'm training to be a minister, there are times that like Sonia's talking and she's talking about like, oh, well, I really think that this person is feeling this way because I was talking to them this one time and, I really picked up this from them and then they acted this way this time. I'm like, way over my head. And I have been getting really jealous of it. Like my brain will never work that way. And I have to work and study so hard to be able to understand people even a little bit as much as you do.
Yeah.
And it's so like, and again, I think this is so much of what I was talking about. I have to go through my brain, through my mind to understand people's hearts. And she just from what it seems like, just gets it.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe she has to like learn how to respond to people in different ways and what helps people in different ways, and learn how to treat a problem another person's having or how to best be with them. But she gets it in a way that I just don't connect with at all. It's very interesting. Because I think the place that people go astray is in their minds.
You mean like spiritually astray? Or?
Yeah. Like, because I generally think that the Lord is with people, and that people are born with this idea of, how we should act. Not like fleshed out, obviously, but with like an emotional drive to love people.
Mm-hmm.
I like to, and I'm an optimist, and I like to think that people are sort of born with that. And that, of course, we're also born with selfishness, which I think we've talked about on a past podcast, not being self-focused thought is not evil. Like self-care is not
right.
evil.
You need an element of that.
But this idea of selfishness, I think, is when we put ourselves as the top thing instead of like,
Yeah, you
I
have
need to
to
take care of myself so that I can help the world and do good for other people. And taking care of myself is the foundation of that. But sorry, did you have something you want to say?
Well, I think you're onto something. Watching my kids, I think that people are born with an innate desire to connect with the other people. You know, you can see your kids, even babies, they see other babies in the room and they notice their peers. They're so interested in each other. And so that need to connect is absolutely there. I think it's really the purpose of human life is to connect with each other. But empathy is a learned skill. Mm-hmm. And I watch other kids in playgroups, or think about people I've known in my life and how much harder life is on people who have not learned empathy. It takes a lifetime to really develop that skill, and not everybody has it. And if you don't have empathy, you can't connect. And if you can't connect, you're a sad, angry person. And maybe you're choosing not to connect. I don't know, the whole nature versus nurture. But yeah, that's the point. I also feel kind of bad saying that nobody wants to be a woman and being a woman sucks. I just feel like for my fellow women out there, I do not regret being a woman. I think there's a lot of power and no offense, a much greater depth of experience for women than there is for men. And sometimes it means that the lows are much lower, but I also think it can mean that the highs are much higher. And you do have that instinct to nurture, which is why I think we were talking about evil women on some level?
I threw it out there that men have done a lot of bad things, but women have too.
It's easier for men to be bad, maybe.
Maybe.
Or, yeah, and it's because you can separate yourself more easily. Whereas for a woman who, I don't know, kills a bunch of people, it's always a little more shocking than a man who kills a bunch of people. Because you have that, we kind of know instinctively that women are more connected, and so to make that choice as a woman is sort of worse in a way because you really know probably how they feel. I don't know. You should edit that out. I don't know what I'm talking about. That's stereotypical. Really that's a lot of stereotyping, and maybe it's not fair. But
I mean, I think it hits at something true.
But on some level, I think we all kind of feel
more
that.
Surprised if a woman is a mass murderer than a man.
Like if there's a school shooting happening, God forbid, they're pretty much all men. There haven't been. I think the San Bernardino was a couple, but I can't think of any. Not that there weren't any, because they happen a lot. Yeah. Which is very sad. But I can't think of any that was just a girl. I can think of like lone men coming in and shooting up a school, but I can't think of any lone women doing that. Yeah. And I think that's there's a reason for that.
I think part of that comes down to men being able to separate from their heart and let false understanding of something justify any emotional response that they're trying to have.
Or just men disregarding their heart.
Yeah.
And being that exactly. Feelings aren't important.
Yeah, that's not important. I know what's right, so I'm going to do what's right at all costs. We talk about these people that are horribly, horribly misled and do something really grotesque. And so often that's a man because he has disregarded his heart in favor of his mind, which has gone down the wrong path. And I tend to think, and again, I don't really know, but that it's harder for women to separate from that idea of connectedness and harder to separate from, like, I think men are generally much more comfortable with, like, this idea of, like, it's the right thing to do even if it hurts someone.
Yeah.
Which I think there are cases that's true. You know, people can be hurt by you telling them that there's something they need to work on and change, but it's not a good thing to do to just let them keep being destructive. But I think men in general have more comfort in just like, oh, it's right even though it hurts. And not that women can't come around to that same conclusion, but maybe, and I'm not a woman, maybe for women it's like, oh, I can see I can see how they're miserable now, and yeah, it's going to hurt to talk to them, but it's going to make them feel better in the long run, and sort of connecting with where they are and where they're going, where they could be, is what spurs a woman to do the right thing in that case. And I mean, that's just me.
And
no,
mentorship wise, it's probably easier for a woman to hear that coming from a woman and a man to hear that coming from a man, just on the connectedness level and understanding more the nature. Maybe.
It depends.
Yeah.
Depends on the topic.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add there?
Women can be so mean to each other.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
In ways that men don't even notice. It's a subject of many a sitcom, and it's very funny, but very awful.
Any specific examples you're thinking of?
Sitcom wise?
Or just or life wise?
Oh, just the looks or the tone in which
Subtle.
a woman may speak to each other, that she's saying something that sounds nice, but she wants the woman to know she doesn't mean it, or she's being mean, and the woman totally gets it. But the guy will, her husband will just be like, "Oh, that was nice," and the wife will be like, "No, it wasn't." I don't know.
I had that experience.
I don't hang out with those people. So.
That's probably good.
Yeah.
I had that experience fairly early on in my dating relationship with Sonia, where we were together, and we had been together probably 8 months at this point. Maybe like 6, doesn't matter. Someone came up that I had sort of known peripherally in high school, and saw both of us and came up and gave me a hug right away, and then said hi to Sonia and was pleasant and walked away. And I was like, oh, that was a pleasant conversation with that person. And Sonia was like, I cannot believe her. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And she's like, we were childhood friends for a long time, and she pushed past me to hug you purposefully, with intent. And I was like, I don't know.
And she knew Sonia would know it too. That was the whole point.
And I was like,
that's messed
whole
up.
level of communication going on there that I think you guys are lucky to miss out on.
I had no idea. I was like,
lucky to
what a
miss out
pleasant
on.
interaction.
Yeah.
And it just right over my
the
head.
male ego sometimes. So, as we start to wrap up, what are the conclusions we've come to? I mean, we've hit on a lot of there are very clear physical differences between men and women, and the experiences they have with their.
You could do a whole podcast series on this. I don't think we've
fascinating.
concluded anything. I think we've concluded that this is all very complicated.
Yeah,
And
no,
we're
that's
very
certainly
different. I think we conclude that we need each other. I think that's a good
I like
safe
that.
conclusion.
Yeah.
Or that the masculine needs the feminine.
Yeah.
They work best together.
Yeah, and I think for so long we've seen it sort of as here's the masculine and here's the feminine. And I worry that a lot of our cultural movement of people are the same is saying all people are masculine.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And I think there's a portion of a movement that's really trying to do something good that is actually undermining feminine strength in saying people are the same, everyone's the same, we're all exactly the same. And I think this goes into, and I'm going to sound offensive for a hot minute, and then I'm going to not be. This goes into the topic of women in a workplace. And I think so many people are women just belong in a workplace, and I totally agree, not being offensive. And I think that from my personal experience, I've had male and female bosses, and they're totally different. Mm-hmm. And they're so different, but they both made excellent bosses.
Lead from different places, kind of.
Yeah, and their leadership strengths, in, again, small sample size, came from totally different places, and they both could not have been bosses the way that the other one was. And they both were, and the two I'm thinking of, were two of the best bosses I've ever had. And so this idea of women in the workplace, I think, is so important and valuable because I think the workplace has been something that has been lacking femininity for so long, and it would be perfected and improved so much by feminine strength. But I think people are seeing that's what a boss is, that man over there. So if I'm going to ever succeed as a woman, I have to be like a man. And unfortunately, culturally, in terms of like employment and promotion, there's probably a lot of truth to that right now.
Yeah, and also the fact that traditional workplaces are set up by and for men.
Yeah,
so
right, exactly.
as a woman entering that workplace, you sort of don't have a choice but to operate in a more masculine way because that's what the system is.
Mm-hmm.
What would a truly balanced workplace look like? I really don't know.
Yeah.
And then there's also physical constraints, like having a baby that can really damage a career.
And
Yeah.
and
then you
certain
have to
jobs that
choose between
don't
the
offer
two.
good maternity care. or
Yeah,
leave.
like most in
Yeah.
the U.S., yeah.
Yeah, because the system is set up to be like, oh, why would you need to leave for months? What do you
Men
mean?
don't have to do
Yeah.
that.
Well, and it also comes down to how we define achievement as well. Because this idea that leaving to raise your kids is a lack of achievement or a career killer, that's so demeaning to
It's messed
what
up.
it is to raise children. Isn't raising healthy children also a worthy achievement? And, we could talk about we should just get together again and talk about that.
Yeah, I
because
would love to.
That's a huge topic. And as a stay-at-home mom, I'm probably not the one you should talk to.
I'm a host of different people.
But that doesn't mean ignorance does not mean I don't have strong opinions, as we know in America.
Yeah, because for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I like the sort of semi-conclusions we're coming to of that there are that men need women and the masculine needs the feminine and the feminine need the masculine. We need each other or else we wouldn't have masculine or feminine if it was just one of them. And we need to use what we are spiritually given coming from our head or our heart to the nth degree to use our strengths to the best way possible and have everyone appreciate the spiritual strengths of each other and not see them as more or less than a comparative thing.
Yeah, and a culture that
How's that feel?
that pushes toward really enjoying and rejoicing in female strengths is one that I don't think we've had for a very long time, if ever. And I think that's where equality really lies in the sort of male-female issue.
Yeah. Letting go of sameness and letting people,
Use the differences to the best degree rather than saying everyone needs to be X.
Yeah.
Right. Or even not defining people by their gender and just letting the individual be good at what the individual is good at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not trying to think what the other person, how the other person behaves or thinks because of those sexual factors.
Yeah.
Oh, this is great stuff. Do we have any final thoughts as we close out here? Anything burning on our brains? I feel like this has been really useful for me. I feel like I've learned new things, and yeah, I've really enjoyed our little chat, for sure.
I don't know. I feel like I should just say that like not all women are as mad about being women as I am. And also, I'm not as mad about it as I sound. I'm really pretty okay with it. It's great. I wouldn't change it. I know some of my opinions, I think, like those women who love being pregnant, they're going to have a totally different take on all of this.
Oh, it's such a complicated issue because people are so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, just treating people like people and understanding that people work differently. And this, I think what this conversation has done, I just remembered what I was going to say. The rest of it before was a filler, if I'm going to be honest.
I think it's really interesting when you say that, I guess.
All filler. One thing that this conversation has done for me has further, and this is something I'm working on a lot recently, just sort of humbling myself to how much I don't and will never understand the female experience and how much that is okay and how much that doesn't make me better or worse and how much that just makes us different and makes it such a valuable place for me to learn. And I think just valuing that difference and being okay, not trying to be like, well, how can I understand this? How can I put it into something I'll understand?
Where's my box?
So that I can make sense of it. Just being like, wow, that's so cool that your brain works that way. Mine totally doesn't. And
we're better
what
together.
can I learn from that?
Yeah.
Just
Two heads are better than one. Two hearts are better than one. I didn't see it. Nice. Guys, thank you so much for watching and or listening to the Spiritable podcast. We are on YouTube if you want to see the video. We're on iTunes and Spotify and anywhere else that you find podcasts these days.
Yeah, if you have any comments or questions on the video, something you want us to elaborate on, if you want to engage us with this conversation, or if you have other ideas of things you'd like to hear us talk about, feel free to comment below our YouTube video or send us an email at...
Come on, you forget every time.
It's okay, Luke. It's just like spiritablepodcasts.
Spiritablepodcast@gmail.com.
@gmail.com.
If you want to write us an email instead.
That's close enough. You'd find it. Just try a couple things.
Melissa, thank you so much for being on here. It was super fun having you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.